She was only 8, and still, they searched her pockets like a criminal, right in front of her classmates. No apology, no explanation, just suspicion because of her skin. That morning, she was a math genius. By lunch, they were accusing her of stealing answers she invented. One teacher whispered, "Kids like her don't solve problems like this." But when she picked up the marker, what she wrote changed everything. Was it brilliance they feared, or the truth behind it? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Watch till the end, then rate this story out of 10, share in the comments below. Your feedback help us bring you even better stories every single day. The rain had left a faint sheen on the pavement outside Claiborne Prep's marble-pillared entrance, but the luxury sedans didn't mind. Their engines purred as chauffeurs, in black coats held umbrellas for boys in starched shirts and girls wearing plaid skirts with monogrammed blazers. The air smelled like old money, eucalyptus cologne, and entitlement. But then came the sputtering cough of a 2003 Toyota Corolla paint-chipped, rear-view mirror taped in place, and windows that had to be rolled down by hand. When the driver's door opened, out stepped Camille Hayes, still in her scrubs from the night shift at St. Martin's Hospital, hair pulled into a bun, shoes worn from pacing emergency rooms. Her hand rested gently on the shoulder of her daughter, Ava Simone Hayes, whose pressed yellow dress and tightly braided hair stood in sharp contrast to the world they'd just entered. No one welcomed them. No student ran over to say hello. No administrator came forward. Just silence, the sort that stretches between suspicion and dismissal. Camille whispered to her daughter, "Head high, baby. We don't walk small for anyone." Ava nodded once, gripping her pencil case like it was a shield. Inside the school's grand atrium, the ceiling arched with imported Italian plaster. An enormous chandelier dripped light like golden icicles. The scholarship test for incoming advanced math students was being held in the East Wing, a place Ava had only seen in school brochures left behind in the public library's recycling bin. As they made their way toward the registration table, two women in heels and pearls looked up from their conversation. One of them pale, sharp-featured, with an icy smile turned slightly toward the other. "I'm guessing charity placement?" she murmured, just loud enough to be heard. The other woman laughed, covering her mouth like the sound itself was rude. "Has to be. That's definitely not the Claiborne look." Camille heard every word. So did Ava. But neither stopped. They moved like they had practiced, like silence was armor, and walking forward was defiance. Behind the table sat a man whose nameplate read, Mr. Blake T. Edgerton, Mathematics Department Chair. He barely looked up. "Name?" he asked, voice dry as chalk. "Ava Hayes. Registered for the Math Scholars Entrance Test." He scanned his sheet. A pause. A double take. Then a thin-lipped smile. "Ah, Franklin Elementary. Interesting. You do know this test is highly competitive." Camille remained calm. "We're aware. She's in the right place," Ava added, her voice even, mature beyond her 8 years. Mr. Edgerton handed her a badge without comment and motioned toward a distant door. Ava walked ahead, but Camille stayed back a moment. "Is there a problem?" she asked, not confrontationally, but like someone tired of games. "Not at all," Mr. Edgerton said with a shrug. "We encourage all backgrounds, as long as expectations remain realistic." Camille's eyes narrowed. "My daughter doesn't need you to lower expectations. Just stop burying them." She turned and walked toward the testing room. Inside, room 241, the space was perfectly engineered, for prestige. Heavy oak desks, glossy whiteboards, a wall of windows that overlooked the school's private garden, blooming despite the season. The kids were seated alphabetically, but the seating had an unmistakable pattern, well-dressed, well-fed, and mostly white. Ava's desk was in the back, by the janitor's closet. No window view. The other students had prep books, calculators, snack bars, and water bottles with monogrammed initials. Ava had 3 #2 pencils sharpened to symmetry, a pink eraser, and a small notebook she had made from folded paper and staples. She could feel them looking. The girl to her left had a French braid and a look of confusion. The boy 2 rows up, whispered to his friend, "She's from Franklin, right? My mom says that's where the city dumps the kids who don't test well." "She looks like a charity case," someone said. No teacher corrected them. Instead, a low hush fell across the room as a tall figure entered. Dr. Lionel Whitmore, the director of advanced studies, wore a gray 3-piece suit and held a clipboard like it was an award. He surveyed the room like he was counting inventory. "Welcome to the Math Scholars Entrance Examination," he began. "This assessment separates potential from preparation, talent from tutoring. We're looking for brilliance, not tricks." He paused as his eyes landed on Ava. Something in his expression shifted, not anger, not surprise, but something close to discomfort. He didn't say her name, but his gaze lingered too long. "You have 3 hours," he continued. "No calculators, no formula sheets, no second chances." There were no kind words, no good luck. A teacher passed out booklets. Ava's arrived last. The page edges were slightly wrinkled. A stray ink mark streaked across the back cover. As she opened it, the first question blinked at her like a dare. It was simple. Too simple. Ava raised her hand. Mr. Edgerton approached slowly. "There's no formula sheet," she said. He smiled. It was a printing oversight. Shouldn't be a problem for a true math mind. Then he walked away. Ava stared at the blank page where others had diagrams. She didn't panic. She just started to write. Her mind worked differently. It always had. Since the age of 3, when she first recognized that odd numbers made better stories. Since the age of 5, when she used patterns in ceiling tiles to understand multiples. Numbers weren't just answers, they were relationships, language, truth. 1 problem down, then 2, then 5. Around her, kids were already stressed. One boy erased furiously. A girl wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Some whispered to themselves. Others stared into space. Ava stayed steady. She finished the first section in 11 minutes. But then a shadow. Dr. Whitmore himself stood at her desk. He watched her pencil move, then looked at her clock. She wasn't cheating. She wasn't guessing. He leaned in and whispered, "If it's too difficult, you can leave. No shame in knowing your limits." Ava didn't look up. "This isn't difficult." He straightened, not saying another word. Then he scribbled something on his clipboard. At the front, a faculty member exited the room, whispering to another. Their eyes darted to Ava. Something was happening behind the scenes, and she could feel it. But she didn't stop writing. She was on question 12 when another adult entered, not a teacher. A woman in a red blazer with a lanyard that read Head of Development. She whispered to Dr. Whitmore. His reply was quiet but clear. "She's from Franklin. It's not possible." The woman glanced at Ava. "Then prove it." They disappeared through a side door. Ava kept writing. In the hallway, Camille stood alone. Other parents had left. She stayed not because she didn't trust Ava, but because she didn't trust them. She saw the whispering, the glances, the polite nods, and then Dr. Whitmore emerged. He walked straight past Camille without a word, entered a faculty room, slammed the door. Inside room 241, Ava had reached the end of the booklet. Her pencil hovered for a second. She looked around. No one else was even halfway done. She flipped her test booklet over. Then she turned to the blank back cover and began to write. Not the answers, but something else. Something no one had asked her to do. Her own problem. Her own proof. It was about twin primes. She wasn't sure anyone would even look at it. But the pattern had clicked in her mind, like a melody, soft, clear, undeniable. She was still writing when Dr. Whitmore returned. He froze when he saw her still at work. Walked to her desk. He picked up her booklet without asking. His eyes scanned the page, and stopped. What he saw made his jaw tighten, not with anger, with confusion, with fear. Then he looked up, and for the first time all morning, spoke Ava's name. But not with dismissal, with disbelief. And just like that, the room changed. Because no one knew her name when she entered. But by the end of that day, everyone would. The wind outside Claiborne Prep bit through coats that weren't designer enough to matter. The sky was overcast. The clouds hung heavy with anticipation, and the smell of impending rain pressed against the school's wrought iron gates. Those gates weren't just architectural, they were symbolic. They didn't open easily. Not just anyone got in, and certainly not in a 2003 Honda Civic held together with duct tape and faith. The car crept down the line of imported vehicles, sleek BMWs, Tesla SUVs with falcon wing doors, and one polished black Mercedes driven by a man wearing white gloves. Each stopped to let out another Claiborne legacy, their children stepping onto the curb like royalty returning to court. The Honda didn't glide. It coughed forward. Inside it, Camille Hayes tightened her grip on the steering wheel. The leather was worn, stitched back, together in places with red thread from an old sewing kit. Her hospital ID badge still clung to her neckline, stained faintly with the ghost of last night's coffee. She exhaled slowly, eyes locked on the towering school building ahead of her. Beside her sat Ava Simone Hayes, motionless, except for her fingers gently smoothing down the front of her yellow dress. It wasn't new, but Camille had pressed it 3 times that morning, until not a wrinkle dared remain. Baby, Camille said softly. You ready? Ava nodded, her face unreadable. Yes, ma'am. Camille reached over, brushing a thumb along her daughter's cheek, then paused. The truth wanted to come out. How the scholarship notification had come too late for real prep. How the testing email didn't list her in the first group. How no one from Claiborne had ever visited Franklin Elementary in person, just sent a generic flyer about equity outreach folded into the back of the principal's mail slot. But Ava had already opened the door and stepped out. Camille followed, grabbing the small, worn backpack from the back seat, a faded pink canvas bag whose zipper stuck if you didn't coax it. It had carried Ava's library finds for years, the most recent being a dog-eared number theory book she'd hidden between Judy Blume paperbacks. They approached the front steps slowly, passing rows of manicured shrubs and granite nameplates. A blonde woman in heels clicked by and gave a strained smile. Another mother in pearls barely disguised her double take. That's when they heard it. A voice soft, but sharp. Someone took a wrong turn. The laugh that followed wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Camille turned and saw 2 parents clustered near the side entrance. One of them, a man with a Harvard Law sweatshirt and a cup of oat milk cappuccino, looked directly at Ava and added, "Poor kid. Dragged into a place where she's just going to be disappointed." Ava heard it. She always did. But she kept walking. Not faster, not slower. They reached the admissions table, where a student volunteer looked up and hesitated. Her eyes flicked from Ava to Camille's scrubs, then to the clipboard, then back. Name? Ava Hayes, Camille said firmly. Right, okay. You're here for the math assessment. Her voice trailed off like she was reading from a script written for someone else. That's correct, Camille said, refusing to make herself smaller. The girl fumbled for the folder. You're a late addition. Camille's brow furrowed. Her application was submitted on time. We got confirmation. Twice. Oh, I just meant you weren't listed on the main roster. The girl's words slowed, the way people talk when they're realizing they're revealing more than they should. Another voice cut in. Crisp. Controlled. Miss Daria Lonsdale, Claiborne's director of admissions. She wore a gray pantsuit, her hair pulled into a low bun that whispered power. Is there a problem? She asked, stepping forward. No, ma'am, Camille said quickly. Just confirming my daughter is registered. Lonsdale gave Ava a long look. Not cruel, just calculating. Ah, the Franklin Elementary applicant, she said, as if naming a species. We like to keep the door open for all communities. Camille didn't reply. She had learned when silence was stronger than confrontation. Room 241, Lonsdale added, handing over a badge with Ava's name on it misspelled. Ava, go on, baby, Camille said. Ava walked toward the building. Each step echoed across the flagstone. The whispers didn't stop, but she didn't look back. Inside, as Ava climbed the stairwell toward the testing floor, Camille lingered outside under the stone awning. Rain had begun to fall. Soft but steady. She could have left, gone to grab coffee, or sit in the car, but something didn't feel right. There was too much air missing. Too much tension in what hadn't been said. And her instincts, sharpened by every overnight shift, treating underserved patients with no one to advocate for them, were screaming. Back inside, room 241 was already abuzz. Ava walked in quietly. Most desks were full, boys adjusting ties, girls flipping through flashcards. Several looked up as she entered. A few widened their eyes. No one smiled. She took her assigned seat, the last row, closest to the supply closet. No name tag. No view of the board without craning her neck. The invigilators moved methodically. Booklets were passed out row by row. When Ava received hers, the front cover had a faint coffee stain on the corner. She opened it. No formula sheet. She raised her hand. No one saw, or chose not to. The test began. Outside the door, Camille paced slowly under the overhang. 30 minutes had passed. She glanced at her phone. Then, up at the windows. That's when she noticed the woman across the parking lot. Short red coat, umbrella, phone in hand, taking photos. At first, Camille assumed she was documenting campus life. But the lens was pointed specifically at the Honda, then at Camille, then at the building Ava had just entered. Camille walked across the lot slowly. Rain streaked down her scrub top, but she didn't care. "Excuse me," she said. The woman looked startled. She was young. Intern, perhaps. Possibly a staff photographer. "I was just, filming for the equity blog," she said quickly. "You know, highlighting our commitment to diversity." Camille blinked. "You mean taking pictures of the only black student at a scholarship test?" she said, calm but razor-edged. The woman shifted. No. We were asked to." Camille didn't need her to finish. She turned and walked back to her car, opened the trunk, pulled out Ava's spare umbrella, and stood in the rain with it, directly between the woman's camera and the entrance to room 241. She stayed there for the rest of the test, because her daughter wasn't going to be anyone's publicity proof. Not today. Inside, Ava had finished the entire test with 25 minutes to spare. She could have waited quietly, could have reviewed her work again. Instead, she turned to the back of her test booklet, the part no one else would look at, and began to write. Not more answers. An entirely new problem. A full proof. Something she'd been working on in her notebook, inspired by a footnote she'd read in a discarded math journal 2 weeks earlier at the city library. She knew no one expected her to do this. Knew no one would believe she could. But she didn't need them to believe. She just needed them to read. By the time the bell rang, Ava's hand was cramping. She closed the booklet gently, looked up. One teacher was already collecting papers from the front. But then before the invigilator could reach her row, another door opened. Dr. Whitmore entered. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't blinking. He walked directly to Ava's desk, lifted her booklet without a word, and began reading. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His brows furrowed. He turned to the board and walked out of the room without explanation. Students whispered. The tension cracked. Ava sat still. Moments later, the PA system chimed. Would Ava Hayes please report to the dean's office immediately? All heads turned, not because of her name, but because they finally knew it. But inside, Ava's old backpack was something that would shake the school's foundation. The hallway outside the dean's office felt colder than the rest of the building, as if the air conditioning had been turned up a few notches, just enough to chill the skin, but not enough for anyone to complain officially. Ava sat alone on a hard wooden bench, feet not quite touching the floor, her test booklet taken, her mind still racing with equations that hadn't yet settled. The door in front of her bore a brass plaque. Dr. Marianne Lindstrom, Dean of Academic Affairs. She didn't know what she'd done wrong. No one told her if she had broken a rule, disqualified herself, or failed some unspoken test. All she knew was the way the teacher had looked at her test, the way Dr. Whitmore had taken it like it was radioactive, and how the whispers started before the bell even stopped echoing. On the far wall across from her, a large glass case displayed Claiborne Prep's math team trophies, rows of gold and silver, years of regional titles, national finalist certificates, and framed photos of pale, confident boys holding oversized checks. Not a single black face. Ava leaned forward slightly. One of the older photos had a nameplate. Jameson Whitmore, class of 2002. National finalist, AMC 12. So he had been one of them. Behind the closed door, voices rose and fell. She recognized Dr. Whitmore's cadence, sharp, clipped. Another voice replied, lower, more measured. Female. Possibly Dean Lindstrom. Occasionally, the sound of paper being shuffled. Then silence. Then footsteps. Then the door opened. Dean Lindstrom emerged first. She was tall, impeccably dressed in a plum blazer, her gray hair coiled in an intricate bun that made her look like a judge from a 1,930 seconds courtroom drama. Her face revealed nothing. Ava, she said. Come in. Ava stood, backpack still on her shoulders, and stepped into the office. The room smelled of leather, cedar, and faint perfume. Every book on the wall looked untouched, but aligned to perfection. Dr. Whitmore stood near the window, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. There was no chair placed for her. Dean Lindstrom gestured toward a low stool beside her desk. Ava, Saturday. Dr. Whitmore broke the silence. You added to the test, he said, unprompted. An entire proof. Ava nodded. It's something I've been thinking about for a few weeks. I didn't know if I'd get the chance to show it anywhere else. His mouth twitched. Where exactly did you see? The twin prime conjecture discussed? Ava shrugged. A research journal. Volume 47. Issue 3. It was in the recycling bin at the library. Someone had scribbled notes in the margin. I thought they were wrong. Dean Lindstrom's eyes sharpened. You're saying you read graduate-level number theory on your own? Ava blinked. It wasn't that hard to follow. That silence again. Doctor. Whitmore dropped a thick folder on the desk. Her test. He opened it, flipping past the basic questions, the ones meant to weed out students who couldn't handle abstraction, and landed on the back pages. Her handwriting was neat, measured, the symbols sharp and confident. He tapped a finger against the page. This isn't part of our curriculum. You've constructed a logic chain that's not only coherent, it's original, almost alarmingly so. Dean Lindstrom's lips pressed together. Your school, Franklin Elementary. What kind of math instruction do they offer? Ava answered honestly. They follow the district workbook. We usually don't finish it. Dr. Whitmore scoffed. Then where exactly did you learn this? Ava looked directly at him. Mostly YouTube. And by checking out books they throw away. Lindstrom sat down, fingers laced. You understand why this is difficult to accept? Ava didn't respond. She didn't have to. Whitmore turned to Lindstrom. This feels manufactured. No offense intended, but it's statistically improbable. Dean Lindstrom raised a brow. You're suggesting what, exactly? There's no way a child from Franklin without coaching, resources, mentorship produced this. It's either fabricated, or she's memorized someone else's work. He turned back to Ava. Who helped you with this? No one, she said. Who's feeding you problems at this level? No one. Did someone tell you what would be on the test? No one. Her voice never wavered. Dean Lindstrom folded her hands on the desk. Ava, we're not accusing you. But Claiborne has high standards. We must be cautious about admitting based on outlier performances. Ava tilted her head. Outlier? Because of my score? Or because of where I'm from? The question hung in the air, heavier than anything in the room. Dr. Whitmore cleared his throat. We'll need to verify this. Cross-reference the proof. Test for originality. Perhaps even conduct a follow-up interview. Ava didn't flinch. Okay. Lindstrom nodded. You'll hear from us within the week. Ava stood, but paused before leaving. My mom's waiting outside, she said. She probably already knows something's wrong. She always does. Then she left. Downstairs, Camille stood exactly where she had been. She didn't speak when Ava returned, just held out her hand, took the backpack, and gave a tiny nod that meant I'm proud of you, even if they never are. They walked toward the car. Rain tapped gently on the Honda's roof as they climbed in. Camille started the engine. You okay? She asked. Ava paused, then nodded. They think someone gave me the answers. Camille didn't reply at first. Then she said, You ever need them to believe you? Ava looked out the window. No. The car pulled away. Back inside the dean's office, Dr. Whitmore opened a file on his laptop, searching through archived assessments. He began comparing Ava's logic to known proofs, cross-checking terms, looking for traces of plagiarism, anything to make her make sense. He found none. Then a message pinged on his desktop. Subject: Outreach footage. Internal use only from Communications Department. Attached was a file labeled Equity Day, Room 241. Camera feed. Raw. He clicked. The footage showed Ava in real time during the exam, writing, solving, pausing briefly, then flipping her booklet over and crafting her own problem. Her expression never changed. Her body never moved, suspiciously. She had done it. Alone. He watched the video again, and again. Then, reluctantly, leaned back in his chair, whispering, What the hell are we looking at? Later that afternoon, Ava sat on her bedroom floor, knees to her chest, a spiral notebook in her lap. Her desk was too small. The floor always felt more honest. The math journal she'd saved from the library sat beside her, the one with notes in the margins. She had always wondered who wrote them. They were in red ink, smart but cynical, pointing out lazy assumptions in published work. She admired the voice behind them. She turned the last page, one she had never checked before. On the back cover, in faded ink, a note had been scribbled. If you're reading this, and you understood what I tried to do, don't stop. No one saw me. Maybe they'll see you. It was signed only, DM. Ava stared at the letters, then looked at her own initials written inside the cover of her notebook. A. S. H. She had never felt closer to someone she'd never met. Not yet, at least. Because DM wasn't just a ghost from the past. She was still somewhere inside that building. Watching. Waiting. Then came the test paper, and silence began to fall. Room 241 had never been this full. Usually reserved for advanced placement seminars or internal academic competitions, today it felt more like a silent battlefield. 17 desks, perfectly aligned, occupied by students from the top 1% of the city's academic elite. Every uniform ironed, every shoelace tucked, every face molded in expectation. And at the far back by the utility closet, away from the whiteboard, and out of the teacher's direct line of sight, sat Ava Simone Hayes. Her desk was different, smaller. A dent ran along one side. The surface wobbled if she leaned too hard. It was a leftover, borrowed from the faculty break room to accommodate the extra student added late to the testing list. She didn't complain, she just unpacked her tools. 3 sharp pencils, a half-used eraser, a ruler with a crack down the middle. Her pink backpack rested at her feet, its canvas worn from years of walking and waiting. Around her, the others took out calculators and prep packets materials approved under Claiborne's relaxed policies for structured assessments. Some had noise-canceling headphones. A few whispered last-minute formulas. Ava looked forward. The board was partially obscured by a tall boy in the front row. She shifted left. No better. Her view of the timer was blocked by a banner hanging crookedly across the window. In pursuit of excellence. Ironic, she thought. The clock ticked louder than it should have. 2 teachers entered the room. One was a woman Ava hadn't seen before, thin, short hair, glasses that stayed on the tip of her nose. The other was a man she immediately recognized. Mr. Edgerton, the math department chair who had smirked at her name during registration. He didn't acknowledge her now. He walked to the front of the room and cleared his throat. Phones off. Bags zipped. Test will begin in 5 minutes. A hush fell. The kind that settles in rooms where too many people believe they're about to witness something historic or humiliating. Ava sat still. Then Mr. Edgerton's assistant began handing out test packets, row by row, desk by desk. The students flipped through pages, checking for typos, formula sheets, anything they could use as pretext to stall. When the assistant reached Ava, she didn't make eye contact, just dropped the packet on the desk and walked away. Ava opened it. Her formula sheet was missing. She raised her hand. No one looked. She raised it higher. Finally, Mr. Edgerton saw her, or chose to acknowledge her. Yes? There's no formula sheet in my packet, she said. He walked over slowly, leaned down, and checked. Strange, he muttered. But surely, if you're here, you don't need it. His tone was sharp, condescending. She should have the same tools, said a voice from the front, a quiet boy, Korean American, seated beside the board. His name tag read Julian Park. Mr. Edgerton gave him a glance that made the room colder. Thank you, Julian. We'll proceed. No replacement was given. Ava's hand dropped, and the timer began. She didn't panic. Instead, she breathed once, twice, and began with the first question. Her mind didn't work like the others. Where they needed formulas, she saw systems. Where they needed cues, she remembered shapes, ratios, patterns she'd studied at home using chalk on the sidewalk, using measuring cups, coins, and string to make geometry real. She didn't memorize answers. She understood them. By the time others reached problem 3, still flipping through pages, Ava was on question 6, then 8, then 12. The air around her thickened. Someone coughed. A girl in the middle row scratched her forehead furiously, erased an entire line of work, and bit her lip. Another student accidentally knocked their calculator to the floor. The invigilator didn't blink. Ava kept writing, but it was when she reached the last official question that she paused, not from difficulty, but from instinct. The problem was meant to be a trap, a disguised function wrapped in a real-world scenario involving train schedules and overlapping speeds. Ava smiled. The language was twisted, but the logic was clear. She solved it in 4 lines, then flipped her paper over. On the blank back page, she began writing something else. Outside, Camille sat in the Honda, fingers trembling. She hadn't planned to stay. Originally, she was going to grab coffee, maybe call her sister in Atlanta, but something in her chest wouldn't let her leave the lot. So she Saturday, and watched, and worried. Then her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Do you know what they're doing to your daughter in there? Camille's stomach dropped. She texted back. Who is this? No reply, just another message. They gave her the wrong desk. No tools, no view. They're setting her up. Camille looked up toward the windows of room 241. She had no proof. but her body already knew. She exited the car, walked toward the building. Back inside, Ava was on the back page of her test. The twin prime proof again reworked, cleaner than before. She wrote in silence, her brain moving faster than her pencil. She didn't need inspiration, she needed space. Mr. Edgerton paced the front. He watched her closely now. Her hand never paused, her eyes didn't drift. There was no hesitation. He walked to her desk. She didn't flinch. "What are you writing?" he asked. "Something I've been working on," she replied. "This isn't part of the exam." "I know." He stared at the page. Just enough to see the Greek letters, the logical operators, the structure. His face changed. Then he walked away. 10 minutes later, the assistant quietly left the room. In the administrative office, Dean Lindstrom was already reading an email from Edgerton. Subject: need verification. Something's not adding up. Attached: a scanned image of Ava's handwritten proof. Lindstrom scrolled, paused, zoomed in. The structure was sound. Too sound. She had seen research proposals from doctoral candidates that didn't look this complete. The handwriting wasn't even hesitant. It flowed. She picked up the phone. "Get Whitmore," she said. Meanwhile, Julian Park, the boy in the front row, kept glancing back. He could see Ava's concentration, see how little she looked like someone guessing. He recognized the symbols from his older brother's college textbook. But more than that, he recognized something else. How everyone was waiting for her to fail. He had seen it before. At chess tournaments, when his immigrant father wore work boots to award ceremonies. At math camps where accents triggered assumptions. At private functions where scholarship kids were told they were lucky to be included. And now, it was happening again. Just to someone even more alone. He raised his hand. "Yes?" said Edgerton, visibly annoyed. "Can we get equal time for the missing formula sheet?" Julian asked. She didn't ask for extra time. She didn't ask for half this. A silence fell. A few students looked up. It was subtle, but the shift had begun. Back in the Honda, Camille's phone buzzed again. This time, a photo. It was blurry, taken from inside the school. A wide shot of room 241, students at desks, and one figure back row, isolated, bent over her desk, writing. Camille stopped walking. Her fingers gripped the phone tight. Then she turned and walked toward the administrative wing. She didn't care about protocol. She was done waiting. Inside room 241, the final minute ticked down. Students began closing their packets. One boy had barely made it halfway. A girl near the window tapped her pencil nervously. Another scribbled random guesses. But Ava sat still, her packet closed, her proof complete. Mr. Edgerton walked toward her, slowly, like approaching a bomb. He took her test without asking. She watched him walk it to the front. He didn't put it with the others. He slid it into a folder labeled discrepancies. And at that moment, in a forgotten hallway 2 floors down, someone else watched the live feed from room 241. A woman in a gray janitor uniform. Headphones in, eyes focused. She stared at Ava's face, then at the test, and whispered, "Finally," because Dorothy Mills hadn't seen talent like that in years. But she had seen people try to bury it, and this time, she wasn't going to let them. A quiet storm was brewing, and it had only just begun. The quiet after the storm wasn't peace, it was calculation. As students shuffled out of room 241, their test papers collected and minds scrambled. The energy, it's in the hall, felt off-kilter. Some smiled smugly, convinced they'd earned their place. Others looked dazed, exhausted by questions they didn't expect. But one girl, who had entered the room unnoticed and left it without a word, was now the center of a conversation that had nothing to do with what was on paper. Ava Simone Hayes had finished the 3-hour assessment in just 45 minutes. Not sloppily, not carelessly, but thoroughly. Her test packet, now in the hands of Dr. Whitmore and the academic committee, was unlike anything they had seen from an 8-year-old, or, truthfully, from many adults. It wasn't just correct. It was insightful, elegant, mathematical poetry, and that terrified them. Because Ava didn't just pass their test, she had shattered its ceiling. But instead of awe, they chose suspicion. Instead of praise, they whispered words like anomaly, concerning, unverifiable. And so, within 1 hour of the test ending, a quiet decision was made. If her brilliance couldn't be denied, it would be challenged publicly. Camille sat in the waiting area of the administrative wing, her phone untouched in her lap. She had refused to leave, until someone explained why Ava had been singled out. why she had been pulled mid-exam and scrutinized by a panel like she was a security threat, not a student. She was tired, not just from the overnight shift or the long morning wait, but from the familiar ache of watching her child be treated like a glitch in a system that only valued potential in certain packaging. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Dean Lindstrom or Mr. Edgerton who greeted her. It was a man she hadn't seen before, taller than most, dark brown skin, smooth baritone voice. Professor Emery Caldwell, a tenured mathematics professor at the local university, on temporary assignment at Claiborne to diversify the academic board. He was polite, calm, warm even, but something behind his smile was distant. "Miss Hayes," he said, extending a hand. "We'd like to invite Ava to a demonstration. Just a brief session with our staff and students. A sort of collaborative showcase." Camille narrowed her eyes. "Demonstration?" Professor Caldwell nodded. "Given the extraordinary nature of her performance today, there's interest in seeing her thinking live. It's a compliment, really." Camille had worked ER shifts where patients bled out while nurses whispered about difficult families. She knew sugarcoating when she heard it. "What if I say no?" His smile thinned. "Then people will draw their own conclusions." She didn't blink. "Give us 5 minutes," he added. Camille didn't like it, but she didn't want her daughter to be cornered in whispers. She wanted the room, the lights, the eyes. "Where's the room?" she asked. The demonstration was hastily arranged in Lecture Hall 3, a wood-paneled room typically used for admissions, interviews, and parent orientations. Rows of fixed seats curved around a raised central stage, which now held a single whiteboard and 2 chairs. Ava was led to the front by Dean Lindstrom herself. Students, many who had just taken the test, sat in the front rows. Parents filtered in, murmuring. At the center of the room stood Dr. Lionel Whitmore, sleeves rolled up, holding a marker. "Today," he began, "we're going to walk through a problem, a challenging one, unsolved, even by some of our brightest." He looked directly at Ava. "Miss Hayes, if you're comfortable, I'd like you to join me." Camille sat near the back, fists clenched in her lap. She wasn't sure what made her angrier, the setup or the silence. Ava stood, walked calmly to the board. Whitmore clicked his marker, wrote, "Let P be a prime number. Define a function, n where." The symbols grew dense. Greek letters. Recursive functions. Nested sequences. It wasn't Olympiad level. It was graduate level research. Theory. No one in the room spoke. Not even the students. Whitmore turned to Ava. "Take your time," he said. "You're welcome to consult your notes, if you brought any." A few parents chuckled quietly. Even a math teacher near the door smirked. It was a trap disguised as an opportunity. Ava didn't flinch. She studied the board, not like a child decoding shapes, but like an artist inspecting brushstrokes. She picked up the second marker. No words, just numbers. She began writing. In the janitor's office 2 floors below, Dorothy Mills leaned closer to her screen. Her old laptop, donated and duct-taped, showed a grainy feed of the demonstration. She recognized the problem instantly, because she had written it 10 years ago, as part of her unpublished thesis. A proof she had submitted and been told was too abstract to credit. She leaned back in her chair, stunned. "Whitmore," she whispered. "You son of a..." Back in the lecture hall, Ava had broken the equation down into sections. First, she decoded the function's behavior at n equals 1, 2, 3. Then she began looking for the recurrence, the secret pattern embedded behind the primes. Dr. Whitmore watched with masked confusion. She wasn't stalled. She wasn't lost. She was reconstructing the problem from scratch. "Miss Hayes," he said finally, "what's your approach?" Ava, without looking up, replied, "You're disguising a Mobius transformation behind a false parity condition. The trick is meant to cancel out when n is divisible by p squared, but your coefficients are misaligned." A stunned silence fell. Julian Park, seated near the front, leaned forward. Camille felt her heart thump louder. Dr. Whitmore narrowed his eyes. "Excuse me?" Ava pointed to the 5th line. "Your 4th summation term. It shouldn't converge. Not the way you've written it." She erased part of his work and began correcting it. In real time, Dr. Whitmore stood frozen. She was right. Not only had she understood the problem, she had caught his error in front of a room full of students and parents. This wasn't a test anymore. This was exposure. A few gasps echoed. Someone from the back clapped once before realizing no one else had joined. Dr. Whitmore turned to the board. Let's try a different approach, he said, erasing hurriedly. No need, Ava said. You're using my mentor's problem, but I already solved it. He stopped. Your mentor? Ava nodded. She left it in a journal at the library. Her initials were on the back cover. D.M. At the back of the room, Dorothy Mills closed her laptop slowly. It was time. A door opened near the side. Dorothy walked in. Not in her janitor's uniform, but in the suit she kept in her locker for job interviews she'd stopped getting calls for. She stepped into the aisle. Every head turned. And as she passed Whitmore, she whispered, "That problem was mine. A decade ago. You stole it." The room went completely still. Whitmore's face drained of color. Ava turned, eyes widening. "DM," she whispered. Dorothy nodded. Camille rose slowly from her chair. And in the silence that followed before Whitmore could speak, before the dean could intervene, Dorothy turned to the crowd. "I've worked here for 16 years, she said. "I have a PhD in number theory. My name is Dorothy Mills. I've cleaned these floors while the very people who rejected my work built their careers on it." She turned to Ava. "And that girl didn't just solve a problem, she uncovered a lie." In one moment, the entire room's power structure shifted. Dr. Whitmore no longer looked like a scholar. He looked like a man exposed. Ava stood still, calm, not victorious, just ready, because she wasn't done, and neither was the storm she carried. What no one expected was how calmly she walked to the board. For a moment, everything in Lecture Hall 3 froze. Dr. Whitmore stood with a marker still in his hand, the final remnants of Dorothy Mills's stolen equation wiped away by Ava's confident stroke. Dorothy herself now stood near the back, eyes scanning the room, daring anyone to contradict her. Camille watched from the last row, her breath tight, pulse rising with something between fury and awe. Ava stood alone at the whiteboard, 8 years old, 5 feet tall. No blazer, no prep school emblem, no pedigree, just her sharpened pencil tucked behind her ear and a memory built like a vault. The room, packed with elite students and their parents, faculty in starched collars, and administrative staff, whose mouths were suddenly dry, now waited for something none of them expected. Proof that the impossible could be made irrelevant. Professor Caldwell, who had watched everything with the cool detachment of a man trained in diplomacy over disruption, finally broke the silence. "Miss Hayes," he said gently, "you don't have to do this if you don't want to." Ava looked at him, then at the board, then at the people watching. She didn't say, "I want to." She said, "He said no one ever solved it." A soft hush followed. Then Ava, in one smooth motion, stepped toward the board. The marker felt slightly too large in her hand, like it belonged to someone who hadn't expected her to need it. But her grip was steady. Her gaze flicked to the corner of the whiteboard, where the function had been rewritten. N equals S negative 1, circumflex K asterisk mu K times N divided by K, where K, vertical bar N and P is a prime. The phrasing was messy. The symbols looked intimidating. Designed not for clarity, but spectacle. Ava's eyes scanned it once. She blinked, and her hand moved. 1 line, 2 lines, a substitution here, a conditional reduction there. Then, a leap, a mathematical pivot that only someone with a deep, intuitive grasp of number theory could take. The markers squeaked for less than 10 seconds, and then, she stepped back. The final line on the board read, F, circumflex 2, equals 0. Not just correct. Unmistakable. The logic was flawless. The simplification, exact. The unnecessary chaos Whitmore had added gone. Ava hadn't just solved the problem. She'd cleaned it, refined it, restored it. Silence crashed over the room. Then a sound subtle, but unmistakable. A chair scraping against the floor. Julian Park had stood up and clapped once. Then again. Another student joined. Then 2 more. Soon, half the room, the very kids who had entered this space, trained to see themselves as the chosen few, were on their feet. Not out of politeness, but because they had seen it. Genius. Not rehearsed, not assisted, not performative. Raw, brutal, real genius. Ava didn't smile. She just stood still, the marker hanging at her side, like a sword she no longer needed. Doctor. Whitmore, jaw clenched, cleared his throat. That only proves one part of the conjecture. Dorothy Mills cut in, loud enough for everyone to hear. And it's one part more than you ever solved. Whitmore stiffened. He looked to Dean Lindstrom for backup, But her eyes were fixed on Ava, and what he saw there wasn't support, it was reckoning. But Ava wasn't finished. She turned back to the board and drew a small square beneath her answer. Inside it, she sketched a number line, labeled it, added tick marks. Then, with the precision of someone who'd memorized every prime up to 1000, she began aligning them to their pairings. Twin primes. And then the twist. Everyone focuses on the gaps between them, Ava said, addressing the entire room now. But if you shift the lens and map the frequency of twin pairings over Fibonacci intervals, there's something else. She drew a simple graph, a crude parabola, almost childlike in its shape. But the pattern it revealed? Order, predictable, increasing frequency along recursive intervals, not just elegance, discovery, real, original, never before modeled discovery. Gasps. Professor Caldwell rose slightly, walked toward the board. He didn't interrupt, just stared. Then, slowly, he said, This isn't in any existing model. Ava turned. I know, Dorothy whispered, half to herself. She just built the missing bridge. The magnitude hit the room like a low-frequency wave. No shouts, just wide eyes, breath caught mid-thought, hearts sinking to the rhythm of realization. This child, this black girl from the district school no one invited, hadn't just played their game. She had redefined the board. Whitmore stepped back, rattled. Where did you even come up with this? He asked, though his voice sounded more like an accusation than curiosity. Ava blinked slowly. I saw the gaps in the library's carpet. Every third square was missing. That answer landed harder than any theorem, because it wasn't about elite training. It was about seeing what others ignored. In the back, Camille had to cover her mouth to hold back the sob that threatened to rise. She had known her daughter was different, special. But this was something more. This was brilliance, forced to bloom in scarcity, not nurtured in wealth, but carved out of resistance. A black child, a nurse's daughter, solving math no tenured professor had ever touched, and doing it with crayons in her backpack and rejection letters stacked in her trash can. Caldwell turned to Lindstrom. We need to offer her a position. Full ride. Extended mentorship. Lindstrom, still stunned, nodded slowly. I'll draft it today. But Ava's voice interrupted again. I'm not done. All heads turned. She erased the corner of the board and began writing another function. Not to impress, but to test them. Let's see if Claiborne can keep up, she said quietly. Not arrogant, just honest. But her tone carried more weight than anything spoken all day. Because now, she was the one setting the challenge. Outside the lecture hall, the whispers turned to headlines. A student had recorded the session. The video would hit social media within the hour. A black girl solves what the math team couldn't. 8-year-old outsmarts Ivy League faculty. A genius from the wrong zip code. And somewhere, inside a whitewashed newsletter draft from the school's PR department, someone hesitated over a subject line. Because now, Claiborne Prep didn't just have a scandal. They had a star, one they couldn't control. Back at the board, Ava stepped away. Can I go now? She asked. Camille stood. Dean Lindstrom replied before Whitmore could speak. Yes. Yes, you can. Ava walked off the stage. To her mother. To a hug that didn't need words. And as they turned to leave, Professor Caldwell called after her. Miss Hayes? She turned. Whatever you need, he said. Books, mentors, lab time, research connections. Just ask. Ava tilted her head. I just want quiet. And maybe some graph paper. A ripple of laughter. Camille squeezed her hand. They walked out. Through the polished doors. Past the marble hallways. Back toward a parking lot full of BMWs. Toward one dusty, dented, duct-taped Honda. But this time, they didn't walk small. They walked like storms wrapped in sunshine. But what she revealed next wasn't just a solution, it was a discovery. The silence stretched, thick and brittle, across Lecture Hall 3, long after Ava Hayes stepped down from the whiteboard. Everyone stared. Dr. Whitmore, still reeling, trembled between denial and shame. Dean Lindstrom held the nameplate of the whiteboard in her mind, as though it were a badge she wished she could remove. Parents in the audience exchanged glances, some proud, some skeptical. And through it all, Ava stood beside Camille, shaking slightly, but proud. Just as the first whisper of cheating unfurled across the room, half-formed, venomous, meant to wound Dorothy Mills, rose from the back row. The janitor who had always polished floors but rarely had anyone polish her reputation. who held her secrets between dusty mop buckets and midnight corridors. She walked slowly toward the front, past rows of stunned faces, and stopped in the center aisle. Her uniform had been changed. Today, she wore plain slacks, a worn blazer, and her PhD cap under her arm figurative. She cleared her throat. Ava Hayes did not cheat, she began, voice firm but not loud. I have seen her work too many times to doubt what I witnessed today. Murmurs rippled. Dr. Whitmore opened his mouth. Dorothy didn't wait. She clutched a leather-bound notebook to her chest. Its edges frayed. Scrawled inside were proof sketches, dated journals, margin notes, tiny ticks of time, page after page chronicling a child's mind growing under pressure. I wrote this, Dorothy said to Whitmore, raising the notebook high so people could see. When I was in your shoes, when I was told my work didn't matter, that I was outside the doors that should have welcomed me. The audience hushed completely. Dorothy flipped to a marked page, dated 2 years ago. It was a proof Ava had posted online under an alias. Ava's handwriting, the same mistakes in notation, the same small corrections, the same idea almost word for word that Ava had repeated today. Doctor. Whitmore's face hardened. How? He demanded. Dorothy didn't flinch. You rejected me when I submitted that work. No feedback, no acknowledgement, just silence. Ava clasped Camille's hand. Camille's throat tightened. She was proud and injured all at once. Dorothy pressed further. You accused Ava of skipping proper steps, of memorizing formulas. But here is her proof published, open, alone without coach, without crutch. She turned pages for all to see. The dates, the edits, the public record. One father in the crowd gasped. A mother brushed tears. Students looked at Ava differently. Now, not like an outlier, but like someone denied what was theirs. Dr. Whitmore tried to speak, but Dorothy raised a finger. Let me finish. Ava Hayes learned not just from books, not just from YouTube, but from living in a world that underestimated her. She had nothing to hide, only truths that others refused to see. She closed the notebook with a soft snap. The room waited. Then, Dorothy walked to Ava, placed the book in her hands. Ava's fingers trembled as she held it, pages worn, ink smudged. She looked at Dorothy, then at the crowd. This was hers before any of us believed she could own brilliance, Dorothy said. A quiet sob moved through Camille, so small, so raw, that it felt like the shattering of a long-held assumption. Doctor, Whitmore finally spoke. This is evidence, but public opinion isn't proof enough. Dorothy looked at him directly. Then produce proof. Your accusations hang in the air. This notebook is proof, Ava's proof, hers from then, and hers today. As the audience leaned forward, someone pulled out a phone, projected Dorothy's notebook onto a large screen for all to see. The handwriting matched, the dates aligned, the corrections, the margin notes, the unique shorthand, all unmistakably Ava's. They couldn't deny what they saw. The accusation collapsed under the weight of something real. Ava's heart pounded. She stood taller. Camille's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Dorothy took a deep breath. I want every teacher, every parent, every student here to remember this is what happens when you refuse to believe in someone's potential because of where they come from. And then Dorothy nodded toward the projector screen. At that moment, across the wall of applause and gasps, the projector flickered. An image appeared. The header of the online forum, where Ava had posted under a username ASH, private timestamped, public, archived. The title read, On Twin Prime Frequency Mappings. The original post had been deleted, but not archived before someone copied it. Someone had saved it. And as everyone stared, and when she opened her old notebook, the room fell silent again. The hallway outside, Lecture Hall 3, cracked with whispers, hushed, urgent, impossible. Ava Hayes passed under the portraits of past math champions, knowing that today, she belonged among them. The polished wood doors closed behind her, and inside, the room hummed with electric tension. Cameras were already rolling. A student had raised their phone, a teacher had opened their tablet, and professors from neighboring schools had been tipped, some in disbelief, others in anticipation. Dr. Whitmore sat stiff in his seat, eyes flickering between his own corrected notes and Ava's face. Dean Lindstrom leaned forward, her expression a tight mix of awe and dread. Camille gripped Ava's hand, so tightly her knuckles were white. Dorothy Mills stood behind them, silent but present, like a lighthouse in a storm. Ava had already done what many considered unthinkable. She had solved the exam, exposed a stolen problem, corrected a professor's error, live, and then made a new discovery about twin prime frequencies over recursive intervals. But now, with cameras rolling, she was about to do more. At mid-room, Professor Emery Caldwell cleared his throat. We believe Ava's proof, both today's performance and her online submissions, have merit beyond our walls. We're arranging peer review. We're compiling for publication. But first, for transparency, we want questions, scrutiny, and verification. A hush. A few parents exchanged glances. Some nodded. Others looked unsettled. Julian Park raised his hand, voice trembling. Professor Caldwell, what journals are we submitting to? Will it be peer-reviewed? There was hope in his question. Recognition. Ava stood. She nodded. Yes. Research in number theory has expressed interest. Also the Journal of Pure Mathematics. They asked for a full write-up. The room gasped. Those were serious journals, not local newsletters, not school papers. From the press table, a reporter whispered, "What about media leaks? Will critics say she had help?" Others murmured accusations again. Already some of Whitmore's colleagues were talking quietly in clusters. An 8-year-old? This seems too polished, too rehearsed. Dorothy stepped forward, voice clear. You want to know where she got help? She had only one mentor in the shadows. You believed she couldn't do this on her own. You believed what you wanted to believe. Her proof has been public for months in academic archives under an alias. She did this alone. The murmurs grew louder. Accusations now floated. Cheating, plagiarism, help from someone else. But Dorothy's calm words cut through. Go look at the timestamps. Her proof was uploaded before any of today's faculty meeting changes to the test bank, before any copy-paste from your files. Whitmore swallowed. He opened his laptop, hands shaking, to check internal logs. The room waited. Then came the unexpected twist. One of Whitmore's own research assistants, Maxwell Chen, stood up. Unafraid. I archived her online post, he said. I remember because I thought the style was strange, mature beyond someone her age. I cross-referenced some of the margin notes. They matched corrections she made today. Her thinking isn't derivative. It's her voice. Ava watched Maxwell. Camille nearly cried. Dorothy nodded once, sharply. The truth was unspooling. But beyond recognition came pressure. Professor Caldwell cleared his throat. We will submit her proof. We will verify it. But you must understand. This opens Claiborne Prep to scrutiny, legal, academic, public. The stakes are no longer theoretical. His voice was gentle, but every syllable felt heavy. Ava nodded. Her voice was soft, yet firm. I'm ready. Cameras clicked. Flashbulbs flashed. Reporters scribbled. Parents leaned forward. Students looked at each other. At Ava. At Whitmore, something shifted. The air moved. The narrative was changing. Just then, the door burst open. A late-arriving figure entered, panting. A teenage girl, uniform immaculate, backpack over her shoulder. She held a large envelope. She walked down the aisle, past the shocked Rose, and delivered the envelope to Dean Lindstrom. It's the original problem set, she said. The one used in last year's competition. Someone flagged similarities between today's bonus problem and that set. Gasps. Whitmore's face turned ashen. Inside that envelope were photocopies. The former competition's problem, unredacted. On the back of one page, in faded pencil, was a marginal note, almost identical to the phrasing of the bonus problem given to Ava. The note was unsigned, unpublished, hidden. Doctor. Lindstrom opened the photocopy, studied it, handed it to Ava. Ava's eyes flicked over the old problem, then to the bonus problem she'd solved, then to the crowd. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing didn't quicken. Because this twist meant everything. The accusation wasn't about her having an advantage anymore. It was about someone else having one, someone in the institution. The room fell silent. Cameras framed Whitmore, Maxwell Chen, Dorothy Mills, parents, students, the press all waiting for what Ava would say. Ava closed her eyes for a moment, and then asked, who wrote the margin note? And yet, the biggest test was still ahead, one with cameras rolling. The auditorium lights dimmed as the murmur of the crowd swelled into tension. A long stage stretched across the front, with 5 boards poised under bright spotlights. Rows of folding chairs stood packed. Students, parents, faculty, reporters. Cameras were set up, center aisle, phones raised in hands, lenses hungry. At the center, a lone podium, with Dr. Whitmore, Dean Lindstrom, Professor Caldwell, and Dorothy Mills, in a semicircle behind it. The air smelled of polished wood, dry erase markers, expensive cologne, and expectation. Ava Simone Hayes stepped onto the stage. She wore her yellow dress, the one pressed smooth, no uniform, no badge of privilege. Camille sat in the front row, face calm, fingers intertwined. Dorothy stood beside Caldwell. Whitmore's expression was tightened, borderline defeat, but still wary. Lindstrom clasped her hands, uncertain. Professor Caldwell cleared his throat. This is the public demonstration of 5 problems, hand-picked by our mathematics board. No notes, no external help. One by one, Miss Hayes will solve them in front of all of you. Our goal is to test her integrity, her speed, her logical capacity. His voice echoed through the hall. If she falters, we will understand the limits of her performance. Ava nodded. Her pulse was steady. She looked out at the crowd, as if seeing them for the first time not as judges, but witnesses. Problem 1 was unveiled. A combinatorics challenge about partitions of a set under modulo constraints. The kind of problem most of the audience hadn't seen until college. Ava glanced at the board, then her mental notebook. Within 12 seconds, she harnessed a symmetry trick, collapsed redundant cases, wrote her solution. It was neat, solid. She walked back without comment. The audience was silent, waiting for crack, waiting for error. Problem 2. An algebraic identity with polynomials in nested radical expressions. Most students would struggle to simplify. Ava solved it in 19 seconds, using a substitution trick she discovered from notes in her old journal. Whitmore's eyes flickered. Caldwell leaned forward. The cameras zoomed. Problem 3 pushed into topology territory. Not expected in this test. But Ava had studied basic topological notions quietly open sets in library books. Watch lectures hiding in corners. She worked this one in about 35 seconds. Her steps were logical, confident. Some people gasped. Others furrowed brows in disbelief. Each success shifts the energy. Reporters whisper. Teachers exchange uneasy glances. Parents lean forward. Ava's performance is no longer speculation. Problem 4 appeared. The board flipped up to reveal it. A research-grade question about elliptic curves and their behavior under certain modular transformations. No exam taker under 18 had ever attempted it here. Whitmore's own published paper had included a flawed lemma in exactly this field, a detail not widely known except among his close collaborators. Ava looked up. She paused, not in fear, but recognition. She smiled. It was not a small smile. It was the kind of curve at the corner of the lips that meant she knew something they did not. She stepped forward with the chalk. Then, she began. Her hand flowed across the board identifying the curves, rewriting the equation, showing how the modular transformation she recognized had been misstated. She corrected the coefficient. She simplified the discriminant. She aligned the expansion. She rewrote the lemma in a way that removed the flaw. Her writing was confident, her logic visible even to those unfamiliar with elliptic curves. In less than 60 seconds, she had done more than solve. She had fixed Whitmore's own error. The audience leaned forward. Some gasped. A few cried. A camera clicked. Caldwell's jaw dropped. Lindstrom's eyes widened. There was no applause yet, just stunned silence. Professor Whitmore's face went pale. He opened his mouth to protest. No words came. He looked at Dorothy Mills. Dorothy's face was solemn. She stood firm. Then Dorothy whispered to Caldwell. You see now why she couldn't be ignored, but loud enough for some around them to hear. The 5th problem waited, a complex, unpublished, unsolved conjecture piece, drawn up just for this moment. It wasn't just difficult. It was meant to be a trap. Observers anticipated failure, watched for hesitation, prepared to write the narrative of discredit. Ava stood back, marker in hand. The audience held its breath. Cameras rolled, phones raised, hearts hammered. The next problem was hers to address. But when she saw the 4th question, she smiled. The air in Lecture Hall 3 seemed to crack, like glass in tension. After Ava Hayes fixed Dr. Whitmore's error with the elliptical curves problem in the previous round, whispers circled like vultures. Professors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Parents gripped programs, some glancing down, some up, as though trying to recall teaching themselves when mathematics ever hurt more than it helped. Camille sat still, jaw clenched. Dorothy Mills' eyes burned with something she had almost forgotten. Vindication. Ava stood at the board, marker in hand, breathing softly, her dress pressed, the spotlight warm on her skin. Doctor, Whitmore's face in the front row was pale, as though every syllable he had ever spoken about standards and tradition had been called into question by a child. Professor Emery Caldwell cleared his throat. Problem 5, he announced, voice steady but strained. This is one of Dr. Whitmore's own long-term research problems, a conjecture he has attempted to resolve for years. It was not included in any exam bank, unpublished, held in his notes. Miss Hayes, you may begin. Ava's heart fluttered. She considered the board. The formula posted, a hybrid between modular form growth and elliptic curve behavior under twisting fields. The sort of arithmetic geometry that made even graduate candidates hesitate. She closed her eyes for a second. A lifetime of studying scraps of lecture notes, library margins, and YouTube derivations all honed to this moment. The room leaned in. She started writing, first translating the statement in her own terms. Given E an elliptic curve over Q, and K a quadratic twist field, investigate the bound on rational points in the twist as discriminant grows. She re-expressed one of Whitmore's coefficients, a twisting coefficient, D, then substituted rational approximations, then bounds, then limiting behavior. Each step was methodical, no haste, but no waste. Within 30 seconds, professors in the audience exchanged looks. Parents gasped. Students sat forward. Cameras panned in. Then came the unexpected twist. Ava paused. She turned to face the audience, in a quiet voice. I believe the error in your long-standing lemma is not just a misestimate of a coefficient. It's an unjustified assumption you used about the Galois action in the twist field, an assumption that hides an alternate path. She erased Whitmore's original assumption term, the one about how primes split in the twisting field, under certain discriminants, and replaced it with a condition she deduced from her twin prime frequency discovery. The logic chain she wrote was elegant. She used the same modular argument she applied earlier, then overlaid a counting argument from her twin prime mapping observation, showing that previously accepted noise in the data was not noise but a predictable variation. Doctor. Whitmore tried to speak, but the marker in Ava's hand moved too fast, every symbol airtight, every inference justified. She finished the proof. Her last line closed the inequality Whitmore had tried for years to tighten. The limsup he had claimed he could bound at something large, Ava proved a stronger bound that improved upon his published result. It was not merely solving the problem. She had advanced it. Silence suffocated the room. Then Julian Park, whose brother had once tutored him in elliptic curves, stood and applauded not loudly, but with a clarity that made others follow. One clap, then two, then a cascade. Parents stood. Dorothy smiled, tears glinting. Camille exhaled as though she had been holding her breath for years. Whitmore's face contorted not, with anger, not acceptance, but something far denser. Fear. He stared at the board, then at Ava, then closed his mouth. He searched for words, found none. Professor Caldwell stepped forward. This is more than an examination, he said. It's publication worthy. Miss Hayes, your work today. But Ava interrupted. I want to acknowledge Dorothy Mills, who first wrote a proof similar to this twist correction when no one listened. Her notes inspired me. A murmur ran through the audience. Dorothy stood, dignified, nodding. Whitmore's mouth dropped open. Then Dean Lindstrom stood. We will begin the peer review process tomorrow. We will contact journals. We will ensure this result is verified. As applause grew, Whitmore swept forward. He reached out, not to take credit, but to clear his throat and say, I was wrong. I built on assumptions I never tested. This result, this clarity is yours, Miss Hayes. Ava's eyes flicked toward the cameras. She bit her lip. She looked at Cambridge, at the person in the front row who had published a similar result, unaware of Ava's independent derivation. She remembered the envelope, the archival document, the margin note from years ago. Then, in front of hundreds, she made a final move. She turned to the board, and under her own name, wrote a new lemma. Lemma H, under the above corrected bound, the growth rate of rational points in quadratic twists is strictly less than D circumflex, n½ plus OD circumflex, where D is the discriminant. It was bold. It was risky, because that bound was unproven, but she laid it out clearly, inviting verification, not hiding in vagueness. The crowd held its breath, because she was not just solving the unsolved. She was reframing it for everyone else. She was about to make history, but her final move stunned even the skeptics. A soft glow from the stage lights reflected off the whiteboard. illuminating Ava Hayes's proof in clean, looping script. The audience, once skeptical, once hungry for spectacle, sat in suspended disbelief. What she'd written after the test was no mere performance. It hinted at something far beyond the lecture hall's expectations, something nearly Nobel level in mathematics. Just hours earlier, they had demanded demonstrations. Today, they witnessed invention. She'd taken what seemed random, twin primes, Fibonacci intervals, frequency mapping. She combined them in an arrangement no one had published. No academic paper had proposed the precise mapping of twin prime density over recursive Fibonacci-based subdivisions before. It was something she discovered quietly, in the corners of seminars at the public library. In discarded theses she poured through. In margin notes, she rewrote for clarity. She had stitched together theory and intuition until they fit. Professor Caldwell, who had been reviewing her earlier steps, nodded once. "This approach," he said, voice hushed, almost reverent. "This is more than novelty. It's—" His sentence caught. He was searching for words. Ava stepped forward. Her proof assumed an infinite base of twin prime pairs, but then she adjusted the assumption. Instead of just counting pairs below a bound, she introduced a weighted function over Fibonacci interval endpoints. She showed that twin prime frequency does not decay uniformly, but rather displays oscillating plateaus that mirror the growth of certain recursive functions. She pulled up a slide she had prepared in advance, silent, because today wasn't about showmanship. It was about truth. The projection revealed a graph, blue lines capturing twin prime counts in Fibonacci intervals. Intervals whose endpoints were f, n, and f, n plus 1. As n grew, the twin prime frequency normalized by expected heuristics showed a rising trend, tiny, but consistent. In academic terms, she had defined a new constant, h, which measured this deviation. No known conjecture had proposed h before. Caldwell whispered behind her, "She's redefining what we expect." Parents in the front row leaned forward. Faculty exchanged furtive looks. Whitmore had closed his laptop, brow furrowed. It was no longer enough to deny, to demand proof of cheating. She had offered raw, reproducible data. Her contribution was already altering standard models. Then came the unexpected twist. One of Whitmore's own former colleagues, Dr. Elena Vargas, visiting from another university, seated in the side row, stood up. The hush pulled tight. "You should know," she said, voice carrying. "I reviewed your draft manuscript last year, Mr. Whitmore. It referenced twin prime density over logarithmic intervals. It included a footnote about unexplained oscillation, one that matched almost exactly the pattern Miss Hayes draws here." The ripple in the room was electric. Was it foreshadowing that Whitmore had noticed this pattern before? Had he seen it and abandoned it? Or worse, had he ignored it because of who discovered it? Vargas met Whitmore's gaze. Silence cracked like glass. Whitmore looked back, haunted. Ava didn't react aloud. She looked at Vargas, then back to the board, then toward Dorothy. Gratitude, yes, but also a chill of revelation. Her proof had something even deeper written in it, a dedication. At the bottom of her projected slide, nearly invisible unless one squinted, were the words, "For DM, who saw the unseen." Dorothy Mills, whose name had already become known among faculty as the janitor mentor, the woman who had cleaned chalkboards no one cared about, whose own thesis had been rejected, whose work had been ignored, whose name had been dismissed. Ava paused. The dedication hung in the air. It wasn't just tribute, it was reclamation. Parents wiped tears. Students gasped. Whitmore's throat moved. Caldwell and Lindstrom exchanged glances that said, "This is bigger than any test, any scholarship, any reputation." The press lights flashed. A reporter leaned forward. "Miss Hayes, do you believe this constant H will force revisions in prime number theory?" Ava's voice was calm. "I believe research must follow proof, no matter who gives it." Backstage, Dorothy pressed her hand to her chest. The lofted proof, the screen, the dedication, it was more than recognition. It was justice, embodied in logarithms and twin primes. Camille held Ava close, whispering, "You changed something tonight." Ava nodded, but her eyes were elsewhere, on Whitmore, on Vargas, on every mathematician now revising what they thought was settled. Whitmore rose. His voice shook. "I want to collaborate," he said, "to publish this with you, to correct the record." The words felt heavy, long overdue. Ava nodded once, but then she stepped back. "Not yet," she said. "First, This must be tested by thousands of eyes. Not for me. For the idea. For the first time, Whitmore seemed humbled. For the first time, the broader mathematics community pulsed with change. She had done more than solve a problem. She had introduced a new constant, remapped twin prime density, paid respect to Dorothy, and forced established scholars to stare at their own assumptions. And in the crowd, Elias Grant, senior editor at a major mathematics journal, flown in after viral video coverage, stood holding a review request form. He was already drafting the invitation. Miss Hayes, we wish to publish your mapping, your H constant, your Fibonacci interval frequency model. The public exposure was inevitable. A journal submission, peer review, citations, academic naming rights. The mechanisms of legitimacy in math were opening up to her. Yet even as Elias spoke into his phone, arranging for drafts to be sent, an issue flickered across the big screen behind him. A typo. A number in her slide and in .com exponent mismatched by 1 power of 2 in the projected scandal. F n plus 1, F n, written where it should have been F n 1 for 1 interval's boundary. It was small, probably a projection error, probably nothing academically fatal, but enough for critics to amplify. Ava saw it too. Her throat tightened, but her resolve stiffened. She turned back to the audience. Her smile slight, not joyous, but fierce. And the proof had something even deeper written in it, a dedication. A week after the showdown at Claiborne Prep, the buzz had burst through every newsroom, every social media feed, every educational blog. News pulses. 8-year-old genius Rosa Hayes exposes racism in mathematics. Child prodigy speaks to Congress. Demand gifted equity. Dorothy Mills. Janitor or hidden scholar. Then came the subpoenas, the invitations, the hearings. On a Tuesday morning in Washington, D.C., the House Committee on Education and Workforce convened. The marble floors of the Rayburn building shone under harsh lights. Reporters crowded the corridors. Parents waited outside hearing rooms. Dozens crammed into seats marked public witnesses. The air smelled of coffee, freshly printed reports, and muted tension. Camille Hayes sat beside Dorothy Mills and Professor Emery Caldwell, all three to give testimony. Ava, dressed simply, with neat braids and her yellow dress, watched from the front row, waiting, her hands clasped in her lap, steady, calm. The clerks called the session to order. The committee chair, Representative Janice Graham, an older white woman known for her work on educational reform, looked down from her raised dais. Her gavel sounded. Representative Graham's voice carried across the room. We are here today because of one girl's courage and one institution's failure. Rosa Hayes, age 8, solved mathematics problems no one expected a child could. We saw injustice. We saw waste. We saw potential ignored. And we have a duty to correct, not just Claiborne Prep, but our national policies on gifted education. Whispers of Rosa Hayes spread. Some thought that was a nickname, others the formal name. Congress had been inundated with letters, thousands citizens saying, "My child could be Rosa. I see myself in her. Don't let us be invisible anymore." Then they called Rosa to speak. She stood, her voice small at first, then louder. Thank you, Representative Graham. Members of the committee, I like math. I always have. But what makes me sad is not being believed, because where I come from, Franklin Elementary, doesn't look like Claiborne Prep. She paused when her throat caught. I didn't have calculators or formula sheets. I had only chance, and I used it. Dorothy then described everything. The wrong seat, no tools, withheld formula sheets. Camille told stories of paying for old textbooks, scouring the library for scraps of math lectures. Caldwell presented charts. Data showing students from underprivileged communities with test scores in the 95th percentile still being excluded from gifted programs at more than double the rate of their wealthier peers. Then came expert testimony. Dr. Elena Vargas affirmed that Rosa's twin prime frequency observation was already crossing thresholds of academic interest. Dr. Maxwell Chen confirmed the archived proof. Congress members nodded. A few Republicans, visibly moved, asked questions like, how many children like Rosa have we ignored? What legal protections exist? Why is gifted education underfunded for certain zip codes? Representative Graham held up a copy of a proposed bill, the Equity in Gifted Education Act, EGEAA. The text demanded universal screening of students in public schools, adequate funding for gifted programs in low-income districts, and training for teachers to recognize diverse forms of intelligence. It also proposed a federal oversight body to audit gifted education access and outcomes. There was resistance. A congressman from a wealthy district argued that talent must prove itself and funding should follow performance. Another worried about cost. Multiple asked, would this create special tracks that segregate schools? Rosa replied softly but firmly, special tracks already exist when we decide who counts as smart, when we decide who gets tools. If you only help those you expect from, you already choose winners and losers. The room was silent. Then, Representative Graham pulled out a large easel board. She had prepared something before Rosa entered. With careful strokes, she drew a simple diagram. A tree. Thick roots, sturdy trunk, branches spreading outward, fruit at the ends. Underneath, Rosa had written, curiosity, opportunity, intelligence, contribution. She held it up. Tears were visible in some eyes. Some of the skeptical members, some parents. The branches carried names of children who had written letters that morning. The roots were labeled access, equity, funding. The trunk, support at home and school. A congressman who had earlier argued against universal screening choked up. This tree represents more than education, he said. It represents what democracy promises. A twist. During testimony, a video was shown footage Rosa and Dorothy had secretly recorded at Claiborne, showing a meeting where Professor Whitmore and some administrators discussed suppressing data that indicated underprivileged kids were outscoring many privileged peers. The video had been leaked anonymously. It played in the hearing room. Silence. Then, outrage. Republican and Democrat faces alike. By afternoon, the committee voted unanimously to fast-track the bill. Media cameras flashed. Outside, crowds gathered. Rosa, Dorothy, Camille stepped onto the Capitol steps. Reporters shouted questions. Rosa, do you think this will pass? Rosa looked at the sky. I know it must. Because what we saw wasn't just cheating or injustice. It was potential starving in silence. Dorothy held Rosa's hand. Camille smiled through tears. Congress had watched. The nation had listened. Then she drew a tree, and even the skeptical congressman cried. Professor Richard Whitmore watched the glow of the screens that had so recently captured his collapse in projection. Ava Hayes's proof, the dedication to Dorothy Mills, the live demonstration that exposed not just his errors, but his prejudices. He stood backstage, trembling in his three-piece suit. As the applause died and the room emptied, the audience, once poised to condemn him, now held him in stunned quiet. It was a silence that stung more than any insult. He had lost everything that morning, his pride, his unchallenged authority, his reputation as the gatekeeper of what was real mathematics. But in that loss, he found something rare, something he had long suppressed, the possibility of real change. He could feel it, raw and burning, in his chest. After the congressional hearings passed the bill, Equity in Gifted Education Act, as an emergency resolution, Whitmore was summoned to a meeting in Claiborne Prep's old staff room. It was the same room where he had once dismissed students like Ava, dismissing their ideas because their uniforms didn't match his expectations. In the dim morning light, he entered, card in hand, braced for confrontation. Camille Hayes and Dorothy Mills waited. So did Dean Lindstrom, Professor Caldwell, and even Julian Park. The conference table was strewn with papers, test results, Ava's notebooks, letters from parents, petitions signed by students. Whitmore placed his satchel down, hands trembling more with shame than cold. Dorothy spoke first. I believe in what you did today, all the way to your apology at the stage. Her voice was calm, full of years where no one believed her, where her brilliance had been hidden. But it's not enough. You must do more than say sorry. Whitmore opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed. I know, he managed. I was wrong. In the assumptions I made, in who I ignored, in all the students I shut out because they didn't sit in the front row or wear certain jackets. Dean Lindstrom nodded. Acknowledgement is the first step. Next is restitution. Whitmore nodded with a tight smile. His shame felt familiar in youth. He had been brushed aside, told he didn't belong in higher mathematics because his accent, his birthplace, his skin didn't fit the mold. He had become judge instead of student. The irony made frost burn behind his eyes. He cleared his throat. I will help lead Claiborne's mentorship program. I will dedicate 1 day a week to working in low-resource schools. I will ensure my future students get access to the same opportunity I denied to others. Julian Park spoke then. Students want to be seen, not pitied. They want trust, not tests. Camille looked at Whitmore, searching for sincerity. He held her gaze. She nodded slowly. She believed him, cautiously. Unexpectedly, Dorothy had prepared her own offer. She produced a slim folder. "I want you to review these," she said, handing it across. Inside, proposals, lesson plans, research on gifted education bias that she had written years ago, notations, terminologies, full frameworks, proposals she had submitted and been ignored. Whitmore accepted the folder. He leafed through it, almost as though seeing his own wasted lectures. Each page was written with precision, with insight. Pages he now realized he could have supported instead of dismissing. He looked up. "Your work is brilliant. I wish I had pushed for it sooner." Dorothy's eyes glistened, not with triumph, but with tired relief. That afternoon, Whitmore drafted an email sent from his academic address to Ava Hayes. He stared at the blank subject line before typing. Subject: "I was wrong." He wrote, "Ava, watching you today was like seeing someone sculpt a perfect shape from stone everyone else had thrown away. I let assumptions blind me. Forgive me. I want to help build the world where children like you don't have to prove themselves first. If you allow me, I'd like to mentor alongside Dorothy. I want to relearn, listen, teach with humility." Richard Whitmore. Whitmore hesitated. His finger hovered over send. Backspace. Resend. He closed his eyes, imagining the message arriving, the weight of his words hitting her inbox. When the email arrived, Ava saw the notification on her phone in the library. Her hands paused over the notebook she was writing in. She looked at Whitmore's name. The room felt momentarily still. She opened it. Camille peered over. Dorothy leaned close. Ava read. Her eyebrows rose. Then she typed a response. "Acknowledgement is good, but what matters is what you do next. I accept your apology. When I write, I hope you truly listen." Whitmore received that reply late in the evening. He sat alone in his study, surrounded by his old research papers, the same ones that had once felt like his purpose. Now they smelled of tarnish. He read Ava's words again, their clarity, their expectation. Something inside him shifted. He powered on his laptop. He opened his old journals. He reread faculty meeting transcripts. He compiled data he had suppressed. He made calls formerly ignored colleagues, former students, parents at Franklin Elementary. Then he prepared a public statement, to be shared in the school newsletter, to be published in local media. It read, "I have stood as an obstacle for students I believed were beneath certain expectations. I was wrong. My assumptions were racist, classist, and harmful. I accept responsibility. I will commit to change not merely in words, but in actions. Full mentorship programs, transparent evaluation of gifted education, repairing what I helped break." Weeks later, in a transformed Claiborne Prep, walls had changed. Portraits of alumni became more diverse. Classroom doors once heavy and guarded became open forums. Whitmore taught a new class after school, open to any student interested in number theory. He visited Franklin Elementary regularly. He graded student work without judgment, with curiosity. He listened more than lectured. Dorothy Mills led that class with him. Ava visited, not as a competitor, but as peer. Together, they co-taught a workshop, Hidden Genius, where children from underserved communities submitted mathematical ideas, problems, proofs. It was messy, earnest, unpredictable. It was on a rainy evening that Whitmore received a package. Inside was a notebook tattered, stained, filled with problems and proofs. On the front, in childish handwriting, "To the teacher who learned late." Whitmore opened it. He recognized the writing. It was from Ava. Inside, she had written solutions, sketches, even mistakes. She had left blank pages, spaces where he could add. His eyes burned. He understood something he'd never fully admitted. Redemption isn't given. It's built, brick by brick. From apology, from change, from listening. He closed the notebook slowly, held it to his chest. The sounds of students in the hallway counting, talking, laughing reached him. Hopeful, alive. And what she wrote in her email to him changed his life forever. When the dust settled from Rosa Hayes' victory at Claiborne Prep, her notebooks tattered, margin dusted, full of problems solved and ideas sketched in pencil, were no longer hidden artifacts. They became rallying points. Across the country, in small towns, in city neighborhoods, in the hushed libraries of underfunded schools, children, parents, teachers saw themselves in those pages. Her essays, her proof steps, her dedication to Dorothy Mills, these became symbols that brilliance could burst through neglect. It started quietly. A first grader in Birmingham emailed the Hayes Foundation a picture of a notebook filled with prime pairings, identical in structure to those Rosa had drawn. A teacher in New Orleans held up classroom work and said, "If they saw this, they'd know I've been teaching genius under the radar." A public school in Detroit created a Hidden Genius Week, inviting children whose schools didn't have gifted programs to present math, art, poetry, all the forms of brilliance that Rosa's story had given permission to flourish. Camille Hayes watched this wave with a mixed emotion: pride, disbelief, sorrow. She recalled late nights when she photocopied pages from textbooks Rosa couldn't afford, when she stayed awake listening to her daughter talk through proofs. All those efforts, once invisible, were now seeds spreading. Dorothy Mills became a mentor beyond her own school. She trained teachers who had never believed talent lay in the hands of their students. She helped administrators rewrite gifted education policy proposals. Whitmore, Caldwell, and Lindstrom worked behind her, helping distribute Rosa's notebooks as open-source teaching materials, accessible online, free to download, free to adapt. Universities joined in. Scholars published essays referencing Rosa's twin prime constant H. Conferences invited young learners from marginalized districts to speak. International programs asked Rosa to guest lecture via video. London, Nairobi, Mumbai. The world began to see her not just as a prodigy, but as a movement. One of the most surprising elements was how different kinds of brilliance were recognized. In Oakland, a student with dyslexia who had never performed well on standard tests drew geometry the way she saw: light, sharp angles, clean curves, and called it art. Her teacher, inspired by Rosa, gave her a platform. In Atlanta, middle schoolers formed a group to explore number theory in everyday objects: leaves, rhythms, parking meter coins. They weren't competing for scholarships. They were waking up, curious. During this shift, federal education departments in multiple states adopted new gifted identification policies. Instead of relying on one test in one grade, or teacher nominations, which had proven biased, schools began portfolio assessments, behavioral observations, community testimony. They adjusted thresholds, allowed room for late bloomers, gave recognition to creativity, struggle, persistence, all things Rosa embodied. But even as the movement spread, resistance lingered. Some institutions tried to co-opt Rosa's story, using phrases like "our gifted student" in fundraising campaigns, or offering selective scholarships that required proof of prior advantage. Teachers suspiciously asked whether students could duplicate Rosa's twin prime model only if they had expensive resources. Debates erupted over what counted as real math, what counted as strategies, and who got to decide. In Chicago, Rosa and Dorothy were asked to lead a panel in front of thousands of educators. Rosa spoke without stage fright. Her voice carried, "We are more than good test takers. We are questioners, pattern seekers. We should not have to prove humanity before intelligence is recognized." Teachers wiped tears. Administrators leaned forward. Somewhere, an established professor, once a skeptic, stood and applauded, his eyes red. An unexpected twist. As Rosa's notebook circulated, someone found one of Dorothy Mills' old notebooks in the basement archive of Claiborne. Pages of flawed lemmas she'd submitted decades ago, ideas rejected as too abstract, now annotated, shared, cited. Dorothy saw her own past rediscovered as people tried to trace Rosa's proof lineage. The recognition that Dorothy had been doing hidden work all along powered the movement. She was mentor, artist, scholar. Her name spread beyond janitor, beyond silence. Rosa and Dorothy set up Hidden Geniuses Network, a nonprofit that offered mentoring, tutoring, pair-up workshops. One notebook, one child, one teacher can change everything. Their slogan read. Grants flowed in. Volunteer mathematicians held remote sessions. Local libraries hosted proof nights. Parent groups changed how they advocated. Children wrote proof snippets on streets with chalk. Community centers patched walls with posters. Your name in the margin matters. Internationally, Rosa's story ignited similar movements in countries dealing with inequality in education. Scholarships in Kenya for rural students. A math outreach program in India that sent tutors to remote villages. A program in Brazil, translating Rosa's twin prime mapping into Portuguese textbooks. News outlets reported on crowds shouting, "We are Sarahs," or "We are Rojas," or "We are Robins," in local versions children who never thought they could be seen like her. And then came the Olympiad. Rosa, now 9, was invited to present as a featured speaker, not competitor, but honored breakouts. She stood on the stage in Budapest, before hundreds of mathematicians. Her slides played, showing twin prime density, showing the constant h, showing how portfolios and open-source notebooks had uncovered hidden talent worldwide. The crowd listened. The lighting dimmed. A hush fell that mirrored the hush that had formed when she first corrected Dr. Whitmore. She ended with a challenge. Let every school and every zip code ask not, is this child prepared? But is this child curious? Curious is preparation enough. As she spoke, Rosa looked out among the audience and saw faces she recognized, children from Oakland, Detroit, Nairobi, Mumbai, who carried her message forward. But it was her final act at the Olympiad that sealed her place in history. Ava Simone Hayes stood beneath the grand arches of the International Mathematical Summit's main auditorium in Geneva. She was 9, barely changed from the girl who walked into room 241. Formula sheet missing, wrong seat assigned. Now, cameras captured her silhouette on stage. Delegates in suits and academic robes leaned forward in seats meant for dignitaries and laureates. The buzz was electric. She had claimed to solve one of the official Millennium Prize problems, a problem that had resisted mathematicians for decades. Professor Whitmore, Dorothy Mills, Camille Hayes, all seated in the front row, watched as Ava adjusted the microphone. She glanced at Whitmore briefly. His eyes were heavy with disbelief. She glanced at Dorothy. Dorothy nodded. Ava cleared her throat. Thank you all, she began. Her voice was steady, despite the thousands of eyes. One of the hardest things I've had to learn is that solving a problem doesn't make you less human. It makes you more responsible. Her fingers gripped the lectern, not for support, but to ground herself. The panel behind her unveiled a large screen that displayed her solution. A full, formal proof of the Navier-Stokes existence and smoothness problem. One of the 7 millennium problems that had so far resisted solution. Clay Mathematics Institute. The rubric flashed. Peer review verified drafts. Accepted for publication. The audience gasped. Ava continued. The assumptions of global smoothness do hold under the corrected boundary conditions I proved. And the singularity set is empty in 3-dimensional incompressible flows with decay at infinity. This proof builds on caveats some mathematicians assumed implicitly, especially when considering energy norms, and completes the missing link in earlier proofs. She paused, letting the weight of the claim settle. Even mathematicians in the crowd leaned forward, whispering. Then, unexpectedly, Whitmore stood. His voice cracked. Miss Hayes, this is unprecedented. To prove Navier-Stokes at age 9, no one has done this. You've done what many thought impossible. Whitmore's tone held both apology and admiration. The apology rising from years of doubt, the admiration forced by fact. Ava shook her head gently. I didn't do this because I wanted praise, she said. I did this because I wanted more children to believe someone would see them. Because I want our policies to catch up with our possibilities. Delegates from the Clay Mathematics Institute sat stunned. Journalists scribbled. Dorothy's eyes glistened. Camille squeezed her daughter's hand, proud beyond words. Ava's proof was not only being accepted, it was being named in full. The Washington-Hayes-Mills theorem. Washington, her mother. Hayes, her name. Mills, her mentor. Because in her view, every part of it belonged to someone who believed or who had been silenced. The panels confirmed the naming. The world recognized it. Then, in her speech, she added something unexpected. But I am not special. Silence stunned the room. Ava raised her hand, steady. Brilliance is not rare. It's invisible in the dark. What matters is who turns on the light. I want to turn on as many lights as I can. She stepped away from the podium to allow dignitaries to come forward. They presented her with official documentation. Proof accepted. Prize awarded. A small package. A certificate. But more. A plan to endow a global fund for underserved gifted students. After the ceremony, back in her dressing room, Ava opened a small journal she had kept since age 5. It was bound in soft cloth. Pages yellowed at the edges. She had written in it every discovery, every sketch, every idea others called crazy. There, she made her final journal entry. It was not about the theorem. It was about what she believed. She wrote, "One name is not my crown. It is a tool. And the equation I want everyone to solve is C plus O plus R equals H, where C is curiosity, O is opportunity, R is respect, H is human potential, asterisk, As reporters waited outside, the doors opened. Ava emerged, the journal clutched to her side. Someone called, Rosa Hayes. When will the Washington Hayes-Mills theorem be published everywhere? She stopped. The world in that moment paused with her. And in her final journal entry, she wrote the equation that would change the world. Stories like Rosa's happen every day, but most never make the headlines. How many brilliant voices have we silenced just because they didn't look the part? If you believe every child deserves to be seen, not just tested, share this story, and tell us in the comments, if you were in that room, what would you have said?